So despite being the most numerous of the subspecies, as you said, the Western Lowland Gorilla is listed as critically endangered.
Hey everyone, I'm excited to share a new podcast series in partnership with African Parks, Conservation Across Africa. Over the month of June, we sit down with 6 leaders from African parks to explore how they're protecting biodiversity and managing some of the most iconic landscapes across the continent. In the 5th episode of our series on conservation across Africa, we sit down with Gwili Gibbon, Conservation Manager at African Parks, to explore the fight to save the critically endangered Western Lowland Gorilla. With populations declining by roughly 3% each year, this species faces immense pressure from habitat loss, poaching, and disease. Since 2010, African Parks has been managing Odzala-Kokoua National Park in the Republic of Congo, one of the last strongholds for the Western Lowland Gorilla, in an effort to turn the tide for their survival. Tune in to explore the vital work African Parks is doing to protect one of the last Western Lowland Gorilla populations. Well, I want to welcome everyone back to our series on conservation with African Parks. Today we're going to be talking about gorillas, specifically the Western Lowland Gorilla, which is found kind of central western side of Africa in the Republic of the Congo. And today we're talking with Gwili Gibbon, the conservation manager, kind of looking at gorillas. So Gwili, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this critical topic of gorilla conservation. I just thank you for joining us today.
Great, yeah, great to be here.
So I think that the first kind of segment that I want to get into is, understanding, what you do with African Parks as this conservation manager. What are you focused on? What does your day-to-day look like? And what are some of the things that, you've accomplished since being in that role as conservation manager?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I've been here in Odzala for just over 3 years now. I'm British. I worked in Kenya for nearly 10 years before that, and then I was back in the UK doing my PhD before I was here. My day to day can be very varied. I spend the majority of my time in the office coordinating things. In essence, my role is to sort of undertake ecological and other surveys to inform management of the park. So estimating the numbers of gorillas and other species that we have, and a whole load of other things, including looking at checking infrastructure projects are abiding by the law and there's no pollution going to the park. And as well as that, I do a lot of support for Congolese as well as international research teams that we facilitate in coming here to help us understand the system and also help build Congolese capacity in terms of research and education.
So, drilling down on gorillas in general, as one species that you kind of look into and study, I do want to give the audience kind of a foundation, like an educational foundation on what gorillas are, because I think a lot of people have, they've seen gorillas in movies, they might have seen videos of gorillas, but, they might not really understand gorillas. So could we start off and just have you talk about, what are gorillas, what distinguishes them as the largest living primates?
Yes, of course. Thanks. Yeah, so gorillas are the largest ground-dwelling great ape. They're native to Africa's forests, particularly Central Africa. They are our third closest relative after chimpanzees and bonobos, and they're a highly social animal. They mostly live in family groups led by a dominant male that's known as a silverback, which is for their silverback. That's a product of the testosterone that they develop as they go through adolescence. Individuals commonly leave their group at around adolescence, and females will join other groups, whereas males will go it alone until they're strong enough to try and take over and claim their own group. And gorillas are very important as a species in the system here because they play a key role in maintaining forests and biodiversity in what we call in science an ecosystem engineer. And we call them this because they, through their feeding and their movement in the forest, they disperse seeds and they create disturbance that opens up habitat for other species to live in. They often live in the same forests as chimpanzees as they do here. but they're different from chimpanzees in being more arboreal. So they're more tree dwelling. Sorry, gorillas are more ground dwelling, where the chimpanzees are more tree dwelling. Chimpanzees are also smaller than gorillas and a bit more agile with more fluid social structures. Chimps are also more omnivorous. Gorillas are almost entirely herbivorous. They do eat sometimes invertebrates such as termites as well as mushrooms, whereas chimpanzees are slightly more omnivorous, or more omnivorous in that they eat squirrels and monkeys and forest antelopes and other things.
So, I mean, the note that I have down here is, when looking at gorillas, you really have two species, the eastern and the western, two species of gorilla. And then you have their subspecies. And we're talking about this Western Lowland Gorilla as kind of the focus of this episode. I did want to, but before we talk about, these two species, when I was doing the research on this episode, in the U.S., there was a movie series that was released in the past called The Planet of the Apes, of several movies. I think the first might have been released maybe in 2011. And then you had subsequent movies that kind of were released after that. But as I was thinking about this movie, I was like, man, it seems like a Western Lowland Gorilla was depicted in this movie, and turns out it was. So for the audience, if you've seen the movie Rise of the Planet of the Apes, I think it was the first in the series, the character Buck is actually depicted as like a Western Lowland Gorilla. So I wanted to include that just to kind of give a visual for the audience to understand this is kind of what a Western Lowland Gorilla looks like. But I will ask you, Gwili, could you talk about these two species of gorillas and where they live in Africa?
Yes, so there are, as you said, two species of gorilla, and each are split into two subspecies. The eastern gorilla is found in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, about 2,000 kilometers to a bit less than that miles to the east of us here, as well as in Rwanda and Uganda, with a mountain subspecies that's very famous and was where the species was sort of first known and described by Western science, which is found in the Virunga Mountains. And then there's a second subspecies of eastern gorilla, which is called the Grauers gorilla, which lives solely in DRC, about 100 kilometers to the west of the mountain gorilla. Then the western gorillas are found in Central Africa. They're found across Angola, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Nigeria, and also the Republic of Congo, where we work, which is also known as Congo-Brazzaville. And here we have the Western Lowland subspecies, which is the most numerous of all the gorilla species. And the other subspecies there is called the Cross River gorilla, which is found in a small pocket of forest on the border of Cameroon and Nigeria.
So, when thinking about specifically the Western Lowland Gorilla, the conservation efforts that are occurring, the research that I did was, this is a species that's threatened right now. This is a species that, population continues to decrease, and it looks like, they are a kind of targeted species right now, and something, a species that needs to be conserved. And it looks like African Parks is doing that. But I would ask, could you talk about, the population estimates of the Western Lowland Gorilla, and really talk about, what are some challenges in even estimating the numbers due to where they live in this dense rainforest habitat?
Sure thing. I also realized I've made some notes here, and I jumped over one bit, which was to describe the difference between the eastern and the western gorilla, if that's useful for you. Would you like me to?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. So the two species of gorilla. So the eastern gorilla, which I described, they're larger, they're darker, and they have longer fur because they live up higher in the mountain areas, and they can weigh up to 220 kilos. Whereas the western gorilla and the western lowland ones we have here are slightly smaller. They have shorter fur. They're commonly a bit browner or even red, and about a third of the size of the eastern gorillas, at about 160 generally for a male. And they're also known, the western species is also known to have more between group interactions than their eastern cousins. They are more social. And so on to what you're saying about the population estimates. So for the eastern gorillas, the mountain and the grass gorillas, the population estimation there is relatively to these gorillas easy, particularly the mountain gorillas that have a relatively small population and they're very well studied and very well known. So they're actually able to count the entire population of the mountain gorillas by individual. Whereas for the Western Lowland Gorilla, which we work with here, it's much trickier. We generally do this through what we call nest counts, where we use line transects to go out into the forest and estimate the number of nests. With gorillas generally making one nest every evening to sleep in, we can then use that to derive an estimate for how many individuals we have. And our best estimates are sadly not too precise. Globally, that we estimate that there's between 100 and 300,000 remaining Western Lowland gorillas in the wild, which is obviously quite a lack of certainty when you're talking at 100 to maybe 3 times that much.
Yeah, I'm curious about, tracking these two species. When you describe the mountain gorillas, this is a lot easier to track. Is that just due to them, kind of being in the open? And I guess cameras and aerial surveys can kind of track and see these species. And then you have these lowland gorillas that are in the rainforest, and you can't have aerial surveys because you have a rainforest. So you actually, I guess, have to go on the ground and actually see these. Is that,
Yes.
Would that be correct?
Exactly, yeah. So normally where, if we're in a savanna, if we're looking at elephants, you'd be able to fly over and spot them and count them. It's not, you can fly over and you will occasionally see elephants in the forest here, but obviously not all of them. And then going in on the ground, you see very little. So that's why we use these indirect signs. So for the gorillas, we count them with their nests, and with elephants, we use their dung. And as I said, these surveys lack precision. This is a lot in terms of variation in the production rate of nests as well as the decay rate of nests. And we need to know how many nests a gorilla produces as well as how long those nests last to be able to estimate how many individuals we have from how many nests we're seeing. We're also working at such a huge scale. Our recent survey shows this. We covered an area I was estimating recently that's about the same size as Belgium or Haiti, also the US state of Maryland. And across this, you can generally only see a few meters into the forest. So we use these nest counts, although we are working with research partners and also the IUCN to look at improving these through newer technologies such as camera traps and so on. But the nest counts that we use have been done here for about 20 years now. So they are our best way to estimate in a way that's comparable to past estimates.
Yeah, I'm curious about what a gorilla or a Western Lowland gorilla's nest would even look like. I can think of like a bird nest and what a bird nest looks like, but what are some things that would be included in a gorilla's nest? Is it similar where they're getting stuff from the forest, building it as like a shelter, coming in and it's kind of protecting them? Is that similar to kind of like how a bird's nest kind of works?
Yeah, so here in Odzala, where we have a lot of thick understory and some of the forest is younger, as in not as old as further north and elsewhere in the Congo Basin. So the forest is more open. And here our gorillas nest on the ground almost exclusively. More than 95% of their nests are on the ground. And what they will do is they'll go out and they'll find an area. They prefer to sleep in an area that's not under trees. We joke that they're scared of trees falling on them, which is probably true. And they will find an area where they will fold vegetation and make themselves a nest similar to a bird's nest in a tree. And elsewhere, and as is done here by chimpanzees, they will nest more in the trees, and there they will fold branches and leaves and other things and make tree nests.
Yeah, I mean, earlier you talked about the IUCN's listing of the Western Lowland Gorilla as critically endangered. We talked about how difficult it is to kind of gauge population estimates, but, you kind of have rough numbers. But, the note that I have down is, there's been a decline rate of approximately 3% per year. And that's equates to about a little bit over 10,000 gorillas lost annually. I would ask you, why is that? Why is there these alarming rates of decline for gorillas? What are some of the reasons there? And what can be done to kind of flip the tide on that and help, turn this 3% decline into something that, is not so bad and not so declining?
Yeah, so despite being the most numerous of the subspecies, as you said, the Western Lowland Gorilla is listed as critically endangered. It's only the mountain gorilla, which is relatively recently been upgraded to endangered, and that's simply because the population there has increased as conservation measures have protected the mountain gorilla, whereas here the populations are still declining, and that is the main reason why the species is listed as critically endangered. So the mountain gorilla, as I said, the population has gone up. That's in part due to habitat protection, but also due to good ecotourism as well as One Health approaches. So looking at disease risk that will affect gorillas as well as humans, and obviously the transmission, which we'll come on to later. But sadly, Western Lowland Gorilla numbers are still declining, both across where we work here in the Odzala landscape and their broader range. So when you look at the IUCN and their listing, they list a fair few factors. The two main ones are zoonotic and other diseases, which, as I said, can be spread from wild reservoirs, as we'll come on to, I think, talking a bit about Ebola. But also there is the risk of other diseases coming from human populations, or maybe from wildlife reservoirs to human populations and then back to wildlife. So disease is the big one, and it's the likely culprit for these big declines, although there is also a risk of them being caught as bycatch and snares. So these traps that people put out for generally for other species, gorillas can get caught in it, and that is another factor at play. So as I said, listen, I'll let you respond.
No, I was just going to ask for a quick, because I wrote down the note disease and kind of like an arrow to decline. How do you, and I'm just spitballing here, but with disease that's kind of, being this big portion of the decline, how do you go about combating that? If this is a disease that, is only really in, which I don't know, I'm just thinking here, but if this is as a disease that's only impacting, let's say, gorillas or, organisms that are in this tropical rainforest, how do you treat that? And is this something that researchers have to go in and try to figure out, what is this disease, try to figure out how to combat the disease? Is this some kind of work that African Parks does? Again, I'm spitballing here, but I just look at these numbers that are in decline. We talk about disease. How can we help the decline of this species and conserve them? Does research play a factor in that, and trying to find, a way to combat these diseases?
Yeah. So I'm not a sort of a disease expert. My background is spatial ecology in these surveys. So I've been trying my best over my time here to learn and understand as much as I can about it. So a lot of the diseases, because they are, as I said, are very close relatives. A lot of the diseases that affect humans also affect gorillas. And one of the most famous ones is Ebola, which there's been various epidemics across Africa for, I think it's the last sort of 30, 40 years. But there was a big one, one of the bigger ones here at the turn of the millennium, which started in Gabon and spread into Congo. It was found, they suspect that Ebola was in a reservoir in bat caves, and somehow from the bats it got transmitted to gorillas and chimpanzees and then to people, and sadly a lot of people and we believe far more gorillas and great apes died at that period. So a lot of dealing with Ebola is making sure that if people come across great ape carcasses in the forest, they don't interact with them, because Ebola is very, very easily spread. It's also putting in place good monitoring, good testing, and then much more than that, which gets very profound and somewhat far from our mandate as a partner that's helping the government run a protected area, is it requires very good public health. So I think in part because of this Ebola outbreak in the 90s, the World Health Organization's continental headquarters is actually in Brazzaville. So we've been talking with them and working with other partners to try and figure out how we do this One Health work. So looking at understanding where there are these risks and opportunities to mitigate the risks by improving public health, but also improving conservation and sort of conservation practice.
Yeah, it's super interesting because, like, I think about, I mean, you described this Ebola, might have originated in like a bat cave. It spreads to gorillas, it spreads, and then spreads to eventually being humans. It's super interesting to like look at. I would even say like a global lens and how disease spreads, and how do you stop a disease from spreading? It's when it's spreading through like animal species before it gets to humans. That's a very complicated conversation,
Mm.
complex. Um, and I don't know the answer to it about how you would stop a disease. And I won't ask you this either because I know this isn't your specialty. But I'm just kind of thinking here about how you would do that. The other I guess note that I have down, when looking at threats to the Western Lowland Gorilla, the note that I have is, more than 75% of this species population, lives outside of protected areas. So I think this is a big sort of thing too, because if you only have 25% that are being inside these protected areas, the vast majority, 3/4 of the species is outside. That can present challenges as well. I think especially when you're talking about disease. I also have, habitat destruction as being a threat. Commercial bushmeat trade is something else that's kind of a threat that I have down. But yeah, I mean, could you talk through, that whole thing too about, how only, correct me here if the stat's wrong, but only 25% of this species is actually inside a protected area?
Yeah. So yeah, just back to the ICN listing as well. So some of the other things they list as threats to gorillas are habitat loss and fragmentation, as well as climate change, particularly with the idea being so a lot of the fruiting which gorillas rely on for their high nutrition value food here could be affected by a rise in global temperatures, or rather actually sort of a lack of a drop in temperatures at a certain time of year that triggers the fruiting. So we're working very closely to monitor flowering and fruiting and other things to try and pick up on those changes. There's actually, yeah, so it's really interesting. So the majority of the global population of gorillas living outside of protected areas is in part a legacy of the placement of protected areas, often being in places that were, often say, high and far, although there's not many high places around here, far from the commercial interests of the governments that created protected areas during the colonial period and shortly after. But the landscape sort of around those protected areas where we have these, it's mainly logging concessions and also mining concessions with settlements and people living and farming and doing other activities within that. Those areas can actually be more productive for gorillas and elephants, which is very interesting. And this is in part, as I was saying, how gorillas create disturbance and help engineer the system for other species. Humans also do that by selective logging, by slash and burn agriculture, which can be done in ways that are not a net negative for the system. That actually opens up a lot more of the understory, and you get this understory herbaceous vegetation that's very important for gorillas as bulk grazers. It's also the same for elephants. They also feed on that, although, as I said, they do rely on the fruit for sort of high nutrition, so they do need trees. Just understory alone is not good enough. But yeah, gorillas can exist in higher densities outside of protected areas, and that's key then on them being managed well and people having minimizing and avoiding poaching, making sure that people there are healthy, and so one of the other diseases that we suspect could be leading to these ongoing declines. So we've been working with partners, and there's not been a positive case of Ebola for 20 years this year in this Congo. But the population is still declining. And one of the diseases we suspect is causing this is yaws, which is caused by a bacterium that's in the same family as the bacterium that causes syphilis. And this it's similar to leprosy in that it's a debilitating disease that causes lesions and eventual sort of maiming, and it can sterilize individuals, which may explain this ongoing decline. And the treatment so it's also found in humans that they know that sadly Congo's public health has still got a long way to go to get to where it needs to be. And they've found that, yeah, yaws is very prevalent in human populations here. And in human populations, it's relatively easy to treat. You basically just need to, I assume it's an injection, or you need to treat around 70% or more of your population just with a broad spectrum antibiotic. I think penicillin is good enough, which is easy enough in humans. But when you're dealing with, tens or hundreds of thousands of wild gorillas that you never see, it's obviously not possible. So that's again where this sort of One Health element comes in, where public health is going to help obviously the people, but it will also help the wildlife by avoiding, poor hygiene leading to the spread of diseases from humans into the wild, or back into the wild if those diseases originally came from there. And that's what they did a lot with the mountain gorillas, is putting in place public sanitation, making sure people are inoculated, and improving public health for the dual benefits to people and to wildlife.
Yeah, I mean, I'm writing all these notes. This is super interesting. You talk about Congo public health, maybe not where it needs to be. Still a long way to go. Talk about how some of these diseases are prevalent in humans as well as gorillas and all these other species. I would guess that there's a lot of funding that is needed to combat diseases like this when you're talking about tens of thousands of gorillas that might have diseases like this. It's going to take money to actually do the research, find the solution, how to combat this disease, and actually administer whatever the solution is. Because the way that I look at it is, okay, if a human has a disease, let's say Ebola or whatever disease it is, it can be treated. I go to the doctor, it's treated. But if we're talking about wild gorillas, that's not as simple as a solution as a gorilla walking into a doctor's office and getting treated. So it's a lot more complex. And I would predict that, there is a lot of funding that's needed. When you're talking about like global agendas, we talk about things like the Sustainable Development Goals, like these global kind of frameworks. This is something that I feel like would be very, very, very prevalent for organizations, whether it's philanthropic capital, whether it's, public sector, private sector capital, kind of funding into this. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to, if species, look at a disease like Ebola, it starts in bats, in that example, it goes into gorillas, and then it spreads to humans. You said there wasn't a case in the last 20 years in the Congo, but still, that's a threat to humanity. So I think funding is crucial and critical. And I know the African Parks is working very hard to kind of secure funding, try to find solutions. But it kind of comes full circle as you start to think about these things.
Yeah, completely. And that's why, so we're working with various partners and also, the World Health Organization to try and prove if we do have this yaws, bacteria that's causing yaws in gorillas as well. So that obviously has profound implications for us as conservation protection area managers, but also for public health, also for funding. Yaws is on the WHO list as one of the diseases, I forget the term, earmarked for eradication. It's one of their diseases they're really trying to get rid of. And if it is going from wild reservoirs into humans and potentially vice versa, then that's got really profound implications where, again, with One Health, we're getting sort of way beyond our normal remit as protected area managers and working as we're starting to do alongside national health services and agencies and international partners as well.
Right. Well, I think it's a good time to kind of drill into this incredible national park, the Odzala-Kokoua National Park, which is in the Congo. It's on the western side of Africa, and this is where we've been talking about these Western Lowland gorillas. This is where we find some of these gorillas. And then the note that I have down is, in 2010, African Parks entered into a 25-year agreement with the Republic of the Congo's Ministry of Forest, Economy, Sustainable Development, and Environment to protect this globally significant park. I would ask if you could just give an overview of this national park, the biodiversity that exists inside this park, and then why it's critical that, African parks protects these species like the Western Lowland Gorilla in this national park.
Sure thing. Yes. Yeah. So Odzala, as we call it, is a very large protected area. It's nearly 14,000 square kilometers. It's, yeah, as you said, in the west of the Republic of Congo. It borders Gabon. And it's because of that, it's on the bridge of the Congo Basin, which is the sort of eastern 80-90% of the park, and also the Ogooué Basin, which is the main river in Gabon to the west. And so it's super diverse in terms of primates. We have a lot of Gabonese species as well as species that are more commonly found to the east in the Congo Basin. It's largely forested. About 97% is forest. We have a small sort of remnant forest savanna mosaic in the south. This area, as I said earlier, the forest here is relatively young. This area used to all be a savanna, largely was a savanna in the last ice age with pockets of forest along the river. And as we've come out of the ice age and into warmer climates, the forest is expanding. But we do have these remnant savannas in the south, which are super interesting, super important, because we have species that you wouldn't commonly find in the Congo Basin forest proper, such as hippopotamus. We also have spotted hyenas. We have a large population of forest buffalo, but they live in the savannas there, as well as a lot of savanna birds and such. But yeah, the main part of the park is forested. And then within that, we have these forest clearings, which are known locally as bais, which are these rare but very numerous little pockets of open habitat, which are in the forest that are super important for a lot of species. Odzala is also very important for forest elephants. I would say that we probably have the biggest single population of forest elephants in terms of the total area of the park, but that is partly because we are the second biggest protected area in the Congo Basin. So yeah, very easy to say. And these elephants also, as well as the gorillas and a lot of other species and more migratory species than gorillas, such as parrots and such, move in and out of the park. We have elephants moving sometimes over 100 kilometers or more from outside of the park, even as from Gabon into the park, as well as outside of the park in these forestry concessions where we're also working and have been talking about in and out of the park. And then back to gorillas. So Odzala is famous. It used to, before Ebola, have the highest densities of gorillas. In fact, they are the highest densities of gorillas ever recorded in a protected area. There's only two places that have been found to have higher densities of Western Lowland gorillas. One is to the west in Gabon, and one is to the east in Congo, where we actually work. So back to what we were talking about before, if as we improve public health and as humans have less disease in the air and less risk of that being spread to wildlife, we put in place the other side of it, where we're avoiding people from eating great apes and such that used to happen here much more. And Ebola was actually a big reason why that declined. People at that time were eating the great apes that then sadly they caught Ebola from. So as we move forward into a place where we're in a better future for people, the populations here will recover. There still obviously will be risks of diseases affecting those populations, but hopefully it won't be as it is or as it has been.
Yeah, I mean, another note that I have down, really looking at the social benefits of this area, this national park. I have down that this national park delivers clean water, food, and shelter to more than 75 million people, which to me is incredible. And you start talking about, we've been talking about public health, we've been talking about disease a lot, and then I start thinking in the lens of, if people are drawing clean water, food, shelter from this area, then you really have to figure out the disease situation, because if disease is spreading across this area, then it's going to affect things like water, food, people's health, people's livelihood. So this area is important for all these species, the biodiversity, but it's also important for, you think about food and water and people's livelihood and humans in general. So I think it's just this ecological system that all works together. And the reason I've really enjoyed, conversations with African parks, and talking with someone like you is, everything works together. And what y'all are trying to do is conserve species, different species. In this case, it's the Western Lowland Gorilla. But because of your work doing this, it's impacting biodiversity, it's impacting public health, it's impacting people's lives. It's just full system. And to me, it's like there needs to be more and more solutions like that, where you look at the root of something, and figure that out, because the root spreads into all these other things. So the other thing that I'll say real quick is, you talk about, this is a massive forest cover. The note that I have down is it's called the green jewel of the Congo Basin. And that's also a cool thing. But could you talk about, the social benefits of this area, these people that are drawing clean water, food from this area, why that's so important, just when talking about the social benefits?
Cool thing. Yeah. So I think the figure you used of 75 million is a bit more broad than just Odzala. So we're in I believe that's a value for the sort of Congo Basin as a whole. But so where we are, northwestern Republic of Congo is relatively sparsely populated. We have about 15 to 30,000 people living around the park, sort of in the immediate periphery, which is comparatively small, although it's still a lot of people. It's 60 villages. It's a lot of work. Being able to put in place good communication and work and meet the needs of everyone. But we employ a lot locally. 70% of our staff are from that area, and 95% of our staff are Congolese. And so a big focus is on that community development and community engagement work, which we do through our 3E+ strategy, which is engaging people in decision making and building trust. It's education and knowledge about conservation and responsible environmental stewardship, and then empowerment. So looking at empowering people with the skills and the resources and the opportunities that they need to take ownership of this. And then the plus part is the additional aspects such as microfinance, and promoting gender and indigenous equity and law here.
Yeah, when talking about community involvement, the note that I have down is looking at protection strategies and this term that's used of eco guards. Eco guards role in patrolling the park, achievements in combating wildlife crime. You have illegal products that have been seized, snares that have been removed. But it seems like these eco guards patrol the national park on foot, by boat, through the dense forest and the rivers. And they're making a real difference. So could you give us a little idea about what these eco guards are, how they, how this whole idea of an eco guard started, what their role is in, protecting this area?
So obviously what we're doing here is we're running a protected area for the state. So everything we do enshrines and respects the laws of the Republic of Congo. So everything we're doing through law enforcement is upholding those laws. And we also do work with other organizations because obviously laws need reviewing and changing over time. But our eco guards are what you would call rangers elsewhere. They are almost entirely from the local area. The government have asked us to employ a few from Brazzaville and elsewhere, but the majority come from the area. And therein we're also harnessing the sort of traditional knowledge and giving people jobs to allow them to continue being stewards of the forest, which is sadly being lost a lot as development takes people to cities and in different directions. And so we uphold the law through these eco guards, through our law enforcement teams, but also through intelligence teams that deal particularly with the trade. Sadly, we still do occasionally find gorilla meat being trafficked. As I said, it's generally bycatch and snares. There used to be a tradition where people would eat gorilla meat as part of a rite of passage for men going to adolescence, and that seems to have been decreasing after Ebola. And we also do sadly occasionally have gorillas being hit by speeding cars. So our eco guards will do checkpoints, ensure people are upholding the law. They will do patrols in the forest. As I said, they'll gather intelligence where people can come forward and report on people, because obviously a lot of the poaching is, especially now with there's a lot better road infrastructure in northern Congo than there was 10 to 20 years ago. And so a lot of people are coming in from outside to try and take resources. And a lot of what we do is trying to respect and put in place good stewardship and good ownership of the land, so that people locally do benefit from where there is legal hunting and legal fishing here. But yeah, as I said, Odzala is changing rapidly with these roads. It means people can move around a lot further. It means they can access more further. And what used to take weeks in sort of 15 to 20 years ago now can be done in a day. So yeah, this brings a lot of opportunities for local people, but also these One Health and land use planning questions that really need us to take more of a landscape approach, which we're doing by working with various partners to ensure that the forestry concessions, but also the park, the disturbances and particularly snaring, which thankfully in this Congo is illegal, so we can clear any snares. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, snaring is actually legal, so snares do stay in the forest where we can clear them. Snares stay in the forest there, whereas here we can clear them. And then, so our teams, law enforcement and also the community development team and other teams also do a lot of community sensitization. We go to the villages, obviously, to engage them in decision making, but also to share the outputs or disseminate the outputs of that, as well as doing sort of wildlife health, One Health trainings. We also do sensitizations, workshops on law, as well as celebrating, Forest Day, Pangolin Day, all the sort of international days to taking pride in nature as well as society. We have a very, very active International Women's Day event every year as well.
I mean, I think that's to your earlier point when you're talking about threats and talking about gorilla meat used to be something that men or I guess boys would eat as kind of a rite of passage into manhood, I guess, and that's kind of changed after Ebola happened. That's got to be difficult, though. You think about like indigenous people, cultural norms. You understand that it's that killing off gorillas is not a good thing, but this is a cultural norm for indigenous groups. Education plays a huge huge factor in that. But that's got to be so difficult because, you have these indigenous people that have been doing this for probably generations, and this is something that's culturally accepted, but that it's not the right thing. So that whole conversation on flipping the perception is so difficult. I would say that's got to be a huge challenge that I guess people face in trying to flip the tide, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of it starts with building trust. And as I said, the majority of our staff that go out and do these engagements are from the local area. Sadly, with all these roads, a lot of the villages that we have around here, young people are leaving and moving to the cities. So you have a lot of elder people staying in the village who do have that sort of sense of where things used to be, and they are very much keen and able to be stewards of the forest. It's just making sure that we respect their rights and their access to resources. And as I said, we do that in a way that allows them to be stewards of their land rather than the trend that, has happened in the West, for example, where everything happens in the city and people in the rural areas are kind of, left behind and everything gets taken to the city.
Yeah. Well, I do want to, one of the last segments I want to talk about here is tourism, especially ecotourism. Because as we know, tourism is a huge, benefit to areas locally for the communities to promote jobs, the economics, the economy of the local areas. It provides, livelihood to people. But as we know, tourism can also be a negative thing at times. But I do want to talk about ecotourism, and what I was researching is, the Republic of the Congo is right beside the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And it seems like people or tourists in general sometimes confuse the two different areas, and they see the DRC as a place that might be dangerous and a place that they might not want to go to, and that might halt them from going to a place like Odzala-Kokoua National Park. And in my head, how you describe this, it's this biologically diverse area. It's this incredible area with species. It's a place that I would love to go. But it seems like tourists might be a little bit confused. So I do want to talk about ecotourism, talk about, the DRC and how people need to understand that the Republic of the Congo is a different place. So could you talk a little bit about just tourism in the area, ecotourism, what African Parks is doing to promote tourism and get more people inside the area to promote local economies?
Yes, sure. Yeah. So as I touched on earlier, so the lessons from the mountain gorillas really show us how responsible tourism, but also research can be key parts of gorilla conservation strategies. So I would say that for the vast majority of people that want to come to this Congo, they come here to see gorillas. That's their main draw. But wild gorillas are very hard to see, as we sort of made clear with our surveys. So what tourism looks at here is we basically have two ways that we approach gorilla tourism. We either habituate gorillas to human presence, so you can do the sort of traditional gorilla tracking, where you can go out into forests with the local trackers and track the gorillas and sort of come across them in the forest where you can see them up close and personal. It's, with the disease risk, we follow all the best practice on making sure that, no one who is sick goes into the forest. Everyone that goes into the forest also has their inoculations for COVID and other such things. And then when you're with the gorillas, there's a time period which you're limited to about an hour of staying with them. And in that time period, you wear a mask and you also don't go close to them. And then, we also have a second type of tourism that's somewhat unique it's definitely unique to Congo, and particularly here at Odzala, where we have these forest clearings that I mentioned earlier, where people, we have people sitting in sort of hides. It's been done for research, and more now we're doing it for tourism, where you sit away from this forest clearing, and the gorillas get used to you being there, and you get this amazing experience of seeing the gorillas in these clearings where they come in to feed and they come in to drink and they come in to socialize, and you're seeing them in a way that is just incredible because they're interacting with each other. They're much more relaxed, whereas gorilla trekking, as anyone that's done it, is kind of more going into their space, so they're naturally more disturbed. And it's super important tourism because the government post-COVID, sort of pre-COVID and then affected by it and more post, is really trying to diversify the economy, as tourism being the third pillar. And so the government is very supportive of us doing more tourism here. And also, just to say that tourism is an incredibly good reason to also give employment to local people, particularly indigenous people, to keep the ways that they're used to and maybe losing, and give them a livelihood based on tracking and being more out in the forest. So then, I think I've answered your question there, but I feel like I forgot a bit. What was the last bit you said? It was about sort of how.
I think you answered it, but I was curious when doing the research. I actually read this article. Time magazine named the Odzala-Kokoua National Park as one of 2024's world's greatest places. And inside that article, they had talked about how people can kind of get confused of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Republic of the Congo because they share a border, and how it can kind of halt people from going to the Republic of the Congo because they look at DRC and are like, oh, it might be a little bit dangerous. I don't want to go there. And that's also a perception thing. So I just wanted the audience to understand, the difference between the two, why tourism and going to a place to look at these gorillas is an incredible thing, and why it should be done, and all of the things that African Parks and the partners are putting in place to make it a really safe experience and an incredible experience.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, it was the Democratic Republic of Congo comparison that I forgot Yeah, so yeah, it's sadly the Democratic Republic of Congo is going through more unrest. It's heartbreaking what's going on there. But yeah, there is a lot of confusion between people. I even have many friends from Kenya of all backgrounds that get confused or may even not be aware that there are two Congos. So it's very profound in terms of its impact. But yeah, so we work very closely. So the two Congos, they obviously are either side of the Congo River. Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Brazzaville, the capital of this Congo here. They are the two closest capital cities on the planet. They're on either sides of the Congo River, and they're very very close, but very different in terms of security. The Congo here is very stable. As I said, there's a lot of support and development in terms of tourism going on. So as we found that because tourism here is also, it's not mass marketed sort of, people picking it on a map and going there. They generally come to Congo because they've heard of and these other amazing protection areas that we have here. And so they tend to come with sort of more of a, inside knowledge or a contact where people can talk to them and explain and assure them of the security here. So that's generally how it happens. There have been some cancellations, but thankfully through communication, we are talking with most people, and we still have a lot of tourists coming, and it's very sad.
Well, we're trying to do an entire PR tour on Odzala National Park and help people to understand how great this place is. But Gwili, I think the last thing I'll ask is for all the listeners out there, if they want to get involved, if they want to help in any way with protecting this species, how can they do this? Where can they find out more information on the Western Lowland Gorilla? Can they connect with you? Any of these things where they might have interests and want to learn more?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. My name is quite distinct. You'll be able to find me on the African Parks website. People are very welcome to get in touch. And what to do. So I'm a Brit that started through David Attenborough documentaries, starting with the love of African nature, and I managed through a lot of persistence and also a fair bit of luck and support from my family to get out to Kenya and then move on elsewhere. So it is very much putting yourself out there and approaching people and talking to people and seeing what you can do to help. But also obviously, change starts at home. So as well as that, looking where you are and where you are at that time and working more locally for conservation, because it really is a global endeavor.